Up. All right. As for a quick review, we have a very senior number of public officials who all have been here many times, so I will skip the mission of the Great Falls International Airport Authority. I think we all know what that is. But welcome. Please remember that the board appreciates participation. If you have any comments throughout the meeting, stand, state your name, address, and your comments will be heard. And I'm sure that will be the case. Okay, with the quorum of the board present, I call the meeting to order. Roll call. Board members. Commissioner Eritz.
Present.
Commissioner Bakke is here. Commissioner Evans.
Here.
Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner Lalonde.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Timbo.
Here.
All right, let's stand for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, starting off with the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion/vote by any board member. The consent agenda items for today: approval of board meeting minutes from January, payroll checks totaling $94,269.48, maintenance and operation checks number 25175 through 25257 totaling $290,636.77, approve the passenger facility charge totaling $50,000, and the financial reports for January. Does anyone like to pull or have any discussion of the consent agenda? Okay, with no discussion, and I have a motion to accept the consent agenda.
I'll make the motion to
Okay.
accept it as presented.
Excellent. And
Second.
Commissioner Lalonde seconded. So with a motion and a second, all in favor of accepting the consent agenda as stated, state aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? All right, consent agenda is approved. Director's report.
Yes, a lot of things going on, so I'll jump right in. On the airline front, Alaska's second flight, which they started here this winter, did fairly well in January for the flight time. That's a 7 p.m. departure, so it's kind of an odd flight time. We really don't get a lot of inbound that early because we have the late night arrival later on, and so that collects most of the connecting passengers that are coming home. But it did well enough that they averaged a 70% load factor for the month, which gave them 25% growth for the month, so that was really positive. That flight will transition here in a couple weeks so that we'll have a morning and afternoon flight, which is really the natural progression of that flight. If we could keep that 2 a day, morning and then afternoon repeater, that would really be ideal. And so the good news is we had a record January. Even if only by a couple hundred passengers. It was the busiest January we've had, thanks to that growth in that Alaska flight. So something positive there. A month from today, I'll be out in Seattle to visit with Alaska at headquarters. You may recall that, I think I've reported before, most of their route planning team has turned over in the last year, really from senior leadership all the way down through the analysts that worked our account for a number of years, have left the company. And so we want to get out there and get reacquainted with them and go through a little performance evaluation of the route to see how it's doing for them, talk about growth in the future. Now that they've consolidated Virgin America into their network, there's some new opportunities with them in California, and so we want to talk about that in advance of the SCASI grant, which we're still hoping to write this spring if it comes out. The 19 award was just made this week, so they're well behind what they would normally, they're well behind historically what they used to do in terms of those grant processes. But they're saying they're going to try to get back on track with the 2020 grant program and have a spring application and early fall announcements so that we could potentially use that grant for service in 21. That's our hope. That's what they're saying, but as of yet, we haven't really seen that schedule transpire. So we want to get out to Alaska headquarters and talk to them about all those things. Really excited they accepted the meeting with us the last couple of years because of those departures. They've been too busy to take headquarters meetings for some time. I think the timing of this is really good. You may have seen they announced a major alliance with American, similar to what they used to have with Delta many years ago. They plan to share frequent flyer miles. It's going to be a strong alliance, so it also gives them opportunities to connect into an international network through the American network. So we think that's a really positive development, could actually play into some other ideas we have with American going forward, and so I think that's all really positive. And so very excited to get out there and see those guys next month. We just found out this week they would take a meeting, so we've made a reservation. I'll be out there a month from today. On the United front, United still hasn't committed to the Chicago route for the summer, even though it's been on sale now for about 2.5 months. Our hope is sales will be extremely strong and help keep that in the market. As we reported, the Great Falls Tourism has approved a $20,000 revenue guarantee for United to have on that route. The Chamber plans to add some dollars to that. So we think we'll have about a $50,000 pot that we can use for a revenue guarantee for this summer on that route, in addition to some marketing that we'll throw in. So we're fairly hopeful that that route will continue. It didn't perform exceptionally well last year with the schedule transition to be an Origin Great Falls. It makes sense why they did that, particularly with us extending that route through September. They were hoping to get more local business drummed up so that route, if it is going to transition to a year-round route, that we would begin to see some of that traffic build on that route locally. So far, since that route's been in place, it's about 80 to 85, sometimes even higher percentage inbound, which is great for tourism. I mean, we love the idea. I mean, that's 5,500 additional passengers coming into our area every summer on that flight. But for us to keep that year-round, we've got to start to change that equation a little bit and send more Great Fallsians out on that flight so that it can be successful outside the tourism season. So we're still waiting. We think any minute now we'll hear for sure that United flight's going to stay in place. Probably the longer they take to make that announcement, the better chance that it does stay in place, because that plane the capacity is allocated right now. So so maybe time is on our side there. But no announcement yet. Delta is still showing, I just looked at the schedule last week, that schedule reduction that we've talked about. Minneapolis, they don't have enough frames in that market to give us a mainline frame this summer, as they have the last 2 or 3 years. They also don't have enough 76-seat capacity to backfill a second flight, and so we'll see a 50% reduction in our seats to Minneapolis this summer, which is substantial. And so we think that's a temporary situation. The long-term goal for them is to move us to one of the Airbus 220s. They're being delivered, but they're well behind on delivery. So they just don't have enough lift in Minneapolis, is what they're telling us. So several airports, us and a couple others, I think even some in the state, are going to see reductions in that route until they can get that new capacity in Minneapolis.
Does United know about Minneapolis reduction in flying?
Yes. Yes, we wanted to make sure they knew that, because that is one of the good things for them. I mean, that eastbound flow, we'll have a lot more demand on Chicago, because folks trying to get to Baltimore or Philadelphia or one of those other cities are not going to want to connect through Salt Lake. That's just not a great connection. Delta, for their part, is going to add a 4th flight in the schedule right now to Salt Lake, but I don't think that's really a one-for-one comparison to, or one-for-one situation with Minneapolis flying. Any of you guys that have flown east know that Salt Lake connection really isn't the best way to go if you're trying to get expediently back from the East Coast. And so we will see some seat reduction, not tremendous amounts because of that 4th flight that Salt Lake's adding, but still probably about 25 seats a day throughout the summer. So. In addition, Trans-States announced that they're going out of business. Trans-States has long handled a lot of our Denver flying. They'll be cashing it in by the end of the year. They're one of the bigger regional jet, 50-seat jet operators that are out in the market. And I think this is the continuing drumbeat of those frames getting old, the pilots harder to come by, and they're just succumbing to that and won't be in the market any longer. We don't see much of an impact. A lot of their capacity will be picked up by other regional carriers initially, but just another sign of the times. Small markets are going to struggle to find airframes in the future, as we've said. Conference update, a lot of conference stuff going on. The aviation conference, the state aviation conference will be here Thursday and Friday. Hopefully some of you guys have signed up to check out some of those sessions. Should be a real good opportunity to learn about the state, the aviation that's happening in our state, and meet some of the other operators. We did plan a late dinner, kind of came up late, but we are Thursday night going to have a Montana Airport Managers Association dinner, which is just the airports more or less. We're going to host it here at the airport. We found some sponsors for that, and so if anybody would be interested in hanging out with some airport folks, we'd love to have you on Thursday night up in our new meeting rooms that have been remodeled. That's at 5:30 is cocktail hour.
No host cocktail hour at 5:30. 6:30 is the buffet dinner.
Yeah. And so if you're interested, we'd love to have you up there. It's a good group of folks in the state, and so we're going to add that to the agenda. But then Thursday, I'm the MC for the lunch meeting, so please don't come.
Don't harass too much.
No. So I'm not looking forward to that part, but it's great to have everybody in town. I think it's been, 15 years or something since we've had this?
Not quite,
Not
but
quite.
yeah, it's been a long time.
Long time, and so we're happy the Heritage was able to compete for this and get it here. And excited to show some people our airfield. A lot of folks haven't been up here in a long time, so that's
I do
great.
need a number though. If you're planning on the dinner for Thursday night, I need you guys to give me a hand. Vince?
Are there plus ones allowed? Yes, no?
We didn't start like that, but there are some plus ones that are coming.
All right, so there you go. Sounds like you can have a plus one.
But I do, they're putting in,
Always work
the
with that.
numbers are going in today for food, so I have to let Oakwells know. So Vince is a yes. Anybody else? Okay.
I can't handle the excitement.
Oh, that'll be a fun. That's a fun group. So I'm glad we can get them up and show them around the terminal a little bit. Tomorrow I'll be speaking to a group of community leaders hosted by the mayor. He's bringing a group through that he's involved with, and we're hoping to make that an opportunity to talk a little bit about the economics around the flight, the economic impact of the airport, the importance of this ongoing airline incentive drive, which we still kind of are stuck there at about 80%. And so hopefully there might be some folks in there that would be interested in joining the incentive drive as we get close to writing our SCASD grant this spring. But I think it would be a great opportunity to talk about the economics of our community and the population growth, and the things that underwrite our air service going forward. And I'm thankful for that opportunity. So that's tomorrow, right? Yes, tomorrow, Wednesday, and the Thursday.
John, is that local folks or what kind of?
From what it sounds like it's folks that are mainly retired, but they invest in different initiatives around the area, the region even. Sounds like even up on the High Line, they're investing. They do some small business consulting. I had not heard of the group before, but he's bringing them up on the hill to show them the airport, and then I think he's also going to show them the 911 center.
What's the name of the group again?
I don't know what he called it. He just called and asked if we could set up a meeting for 30 people, and it sounds like a pretty big group. So, but yeah, so that's tomorrow. I'm excited to get that opportunity. The light fixture for the restaurant outside has been ordered, and they're coming in March? April. They're coming in April to install it, so we'll finally get that project done. We've been working on that since the terminal remodel. We think we have a way of mounting. I would not sit directly under the lights for a while. That's not true.
I'm going to turn the tape recorder on.
No, we're fairly confident we got it figured out. Rod's done a good job of working with some of the folks involved in installing that cloud mechanism up there to try and figure out what it's capable of and how we can get that mounted. So excited to see that finally moving ahead. Our road project, which is our largest project for this summer, will bid in 2 weeks. We're getting close to that time, and then we expect a grant. By the time we come to March, we think we'll have a grant offer and we'll be able to award the project, which is great. I mean, that's probably a solid month or two earlier than what we've done in the last few years. So it's good to see the FAA able to push out some of those dollars. One other thing I was going to note, the proponents of the school levy would like to come and present to the board. I talked to them and mentioned we probably wouldn't be anything we could directly support. In the past, the board said it's it's not really in our mission, but they would like to just get out and make some community presentations. They're trying to get out to as many people as possible. I think, our public and the board members themselves are kind of the audience for that. And so I told them I'd bring that to the board and see if anyone objected to that. I mean, most public boards would accept some kind of public comment from a group. I don't see that it harms anything, but if anyone objects to it, we could certainly talk about that further.
Did they ask us the last time?
They did.
And they came.
And they actually came
Yeah.
and gave a brief presentation.
Was it worthwhile?
Well,
I think the main thing they're trying to do is just get the word out.
Yep,
And so
awareness.
their idea is to get on as many agendas as possible and make these presentations about, what it means. And I think they refine the pitch a little bit every time. So to me, I think it's probably a good opportunity for them to get out and try it out.
well, if you haven't heard it, yes. If you've heard it, you'll be,
Pretty informative.
yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
How underfunded they are compared to the other school districts in larger cities. It's pretty depressing.
I know.
Is there any reason it would be construed as support?
I don't think so. Certainly if the opposing group wanted to come and do the same thing, I think you'd have to be open to that. To me, it's a public board. They could certainly come and make their 2-minute comments each rather than just one presentation, which would be more disruptive.
Is there actually a formal group opposing?
I don't know.
I don't know, I was wondering.
Yeah, I think it's, not that I'm aware of, but I'm sure somebody, I think last time there was a couple people who took it upon themselves to show up at some of the meetings and kind of present the opposite case. Well, we'll tell them they can certainly come and make that presentation. And the last thing I was just going to mention, we're still working on the 5-year expense comparison. Maria and I were working on that last month. We didn't quite get it done. And so we'll get that for March, so we can take a look at how the expenses are. The first couple looks at it, not a lot of changes really, but I didn't get a chance to work with her last week, so we'll try to nail it down for the next meeting. And that's, let's see, make sure I cover everything here. States, conference, I think that's it.
So,
I was going to mention, we picked up some more sponsors for the for our Air Service Conference in September. We've got a lot of local businesses that are providing some items for our gift basket. We're really excited to be, it's going to be all Montana made. High Country Jerky was the latest to sign on. We've got Bozeman Spirits is going to provide some things. So I think that's going to be really nice to be able to highlight some of the Crackling Kamoots in there. Some of the things from our region that people can take a look at. And so, so far it seems to be going pretty well. We're getting close to putting together a budget so we can start looking for sponsors for some of the dinners and that type of thing. At the other airports, at Republic Parking and some of the vendors that work at the various airports have gotten involved with that. So we're hoping we'll be able to pick up some of those sponsors that pick up some of the meals and that type of thing for our event. We've also picked up a lot of activity sponsors, Highline Climbing Center. Shields is going to provide mountain bikes for some of the activities we're doing with the airlines. So a really great opportunity for us to highlight the community, and we're seeing a lot of people get involved with sponsoring that. So I'm excited to be doing that. Our goal is in March to put out an agenda to the airlines so that they have an idea what the schedule of the event would be. Then start taking RSVPs right in the June timeframe so we know approximately how many people we have for meals and activities and that type of thing. So coming up.
tomorrow, it seems like.
I know. Ooh.
2 quick questions. On the Alaska meeting that you're talking to, you brought up in the SCADSI discussion at the same time. Because we already serve Seattle, where could we potentially use a SCADSI for Alaska? Or are we talking more of a broader picture? I know they go Portland, and does Portland have any?
Portland is a growing market for us, probably not to the extent that we could look for service to it, but I think California is an interesting discussion with their new Virgin gates at like a San Francisco or even LA. Many years ago, Alaska had focus cities, almost every major city in California, and so you see them rebuilding some of that, and it'll be interesting to see how that American Alliance provides them with some opportunities to feed into American flights at some of those hubs. And so that's really what we want to explore, because the way we'll likely write the SCASD grant is direct service to either Texas or California, because we don't have either. And so that you will be having a broad discussion with them primarily about California, that we'd like to have Alaska fly one of those routes. And so that's the nature of the discussion. There's I think a decent chance that they would be interested in that. They just started some LA flying out of Missoula in the last 6 months, it was announced. I think the flight starts next month, but that might be a possibility. And so that's what we want to do, is try to engage them on how do we grow with Alaska. I think the second Seattle flight is imperative for us to grow into, but then beyond that, what is the next step? Probably not Portland. It's just too close to Seattle and not a big enough market for us. I think it's top 10, but it's like 8,
Yeah.
like right in there.
Is San Fran in the top 10?
Yes, San Fran is around 7. It's but it's quite a difference in number per day than it is Portland. Partially because of the international feed, most likely, and the California connections in there. But yeah, San Fran and LA. LA is our largest unserved market. It's our 3rd largest market overall. So there are some really good markets in there that Alaska has flights into.
And then just a little more on the whole Trans-State closure. Trans-State Holdings actually has Trans-State Airlines plus GoJet plus Compass. So as part of that letter that they sent out, it sounds like they're probably going to take those airplanes that they can't run a separate airline with and consolidate those into one of the other airlines for more efficient operations, because the margins are so small. So there is definitely, with the lack of pilots out there, consolidation going on and trying to run less and less training programs and get more of a flow through.
Okay, part of their problem is they run a mixed market, a mixed airframe market, if you will.
Yeah.
Trans-State is the ERJ 145, GoJet is strictly the CRJ 700, and then Compass was the E175s.
Yeah.
So it gets expensive when you start to run 3 different airframes.
Absolutely.
Maybe too early, but any predictions on trickle-down effect of this coronavirus effect on the Asian market?
It is interesting. I can't remember what our numbers are for China into here. Really low. I mean, obviously, but I do think you'll see problems in the West Coast markets that we connect to. Certainly there's a lot of tourism into Seattle, San Francisco, that whole western seaboard. So I think anything that, luckily oil's still cheap, really cheap, and seems to be getting cheaper, and the coronavirus making it even cheaper. So ideally, when you look at the global effect, I know United is saying they're seeing 75% reductions in Asian travel. So hopefully they'll pull that capacity back into other markets that can use it. In fact, even recently, I think it was you were telling me there's some 787s flying domestically.
Yeah. They've taken those that they've turned off, and because we don't have the 7.3 MAX back until September, they're actually using the 777s and the 7.8s now domestically long haul between the hubs and filling them up going between hubs, which you can put basically 4 737s on it and do it with 1 777.
So if the U.S. doesn't get hit particularly hard by the virus itself, I think there's enough demand domestically to backfill a lot of what the airlines, would otherwise do internationally. Is that they're out of capacity all over the place, and oil being cheap, I don't think they'll get much of a financial hit, assuming it doesn't hit locally in any dramatic fashion. I mean, you remember even SARS really hit the airlines pretty hard. Back a few years ago, I think it was in Houston or something, they had a few outbreaks down there. It was one of the southern markets, and so there was a pretty good impact on the U.S. carriers. So far, we don't see that with coronavirus, but that could change overnight. If you had 80 or something cases diagnosed, in one urban area, just like they did, was it yesterday or the day before in South Korea, 80 new cases. That could really put a freeze on
Italy's the big
things.
one right
Yeah,
now.
Italy's the one that troubles me.
Yeah.
I mean, the 300 cases basically overnight, and how's that going to impact the East Coast? I mean,
Who was just in Italy?
Tammy Lacey. That was a few weeks ago, she just got back, so, yeah.
I don't know,
I was thinking maybe more positive, at least temporarily, a positive impact on capacity.
Yeah, it's not as a high dollar market, but it definitely opens up capacity for taking, filling in the slack with the 737 MAX out. Doesn't help Southwest Airlines out any, but it helps a lot of the other guys, us and American a lot.
You know, and I saw just in reading one of those articles, somebody just saying, hey, maybe consider a domestic vacation this year. You know, so you are starting already to hear, you know,
Yeah.
a little bit of that. Yeah, maybe we'll stick closer to home, and you know, which could impact the airlines on those overseas routes. I mean, but in terms of timing, it probably couldn't have come at much of a better time for the U.S. industry because of those low oil prices and the demand domestically that isn't being met.
Good. All right, did we cover the capital project update in that
Yes, I
discussion?
hit it with the in there.
Okay, let's get on to the items. First off, if there are any agenda items which present a conflict of interest and subsequently require a member to abstain from discussion and vote, please let us know. Other than that, get into a capital number 1, capital purchase of the used runway snow broom.
Yes, as we mentioned last month, we did identify a used broom down in Des Moines. They're buying a new fleet of vehicles, which they do routinely, and then they part out their old ones. The unit has about half the hours, half the miles of our current newest standalone broom. And we do use those in storms where it's a very light snow, or where we don't have a great volume of snow. They're pretty useful. And we also try to use them on the center line lights when we can, because our plows can bust those center line lights. So they're still a pretty useful machine, but you know, we've been kind of kicking the can a little bit with that one because it's about the same cost as a combi, only about $70,000, $80,000 less. And we get so much more utility out of those combi machines. So the opportunity to buy a used one at a heavily discounted rate, we really couldn't pass up. And so we'd like authorization to spend $90,000 to acquire that machine, including shipping, and to get it up here from Des Moines. And I'm told it'll be here around May. It's kind of
Yeah, I think we can pick it up anytime after May.
So we'll have that for next winter, which is great.
Is last night's snow an example of when a broom is better, or is that a common?
Yeah, that would have been, we used the front mount brooms on the center line just because the other ones will pack the snow because it
A wet snow.
runs over the snow first before it sweeps it. But
Yeah, it's a difficult problem because those light cans, if we put the blade all the way down on the ground, the light can will shave a piece of the blade off. And where the lens meets the light, there's a sliver of metal in there. And what we found when we were running plastic blades and put them all the way in the ground is it shaves a bunch of those off and just shims that metal up and cracks it. And so there for 4 or 5 years, we were having a lot of problems with those blades. So we switched to rubber, and the rubber's a little bit better, but we still haven't found a great solution for leaving the blade all the way in the ground. And so, as Rod says, when that blade is just up a smidge, that gets the snow to the wheel, and then those heavy trucks will pack the snow to the ground, and we have a hard time scraping it up. Broom just isn't powerful enough to get that packed snow off of the surface. And so when you look out there, we'll have a clean surface with a bunch of tire marks everywhere, you know, which can be slippery. And so the front mounts are nice because we can run one of those down the center line, and then on the outsides of it run the combis. That keeps us from having that issue. And so you know, that's what we continue to experiment with, is better ways of setting the equipment up to clean those areas.
How does this model fit in with like the rest of the fleet?
The nice thing is that we have Oshkosh equipment already. We picked up some units from Malmstrom when they parted out their snow fleet. And so we have this type of unit already on site. And so we've got some interoperability with a couple of the units we already have, which is good news. And what this also allows us to do, the other major purchase we've been kind of trying to punt down the road, is a new snow blower. We have an old machine we got from Malmstrom with relatively low hours, you know, and it's been pretty reliable, but that's our mainline machine. And we have a broom unit, another Oshkosh, that we're using in backup to our main broom unit today. And this will allow us to take one of those broom units and keep it in reserve for a second snow blower, because we actually have a second snow blower head. So we can prolong the life of our snow blower fleet because that's another really expensive piece of equipment. That probably, I think that one's around $750,000, don't we, Rod?
At least, yeah.
Yeah, maybe even $850. And so that's like our most expensive piece. And we're hoping if we can wait long enough, the FAA might provide discretionary funding for this. We've been asking for discretionary funds now, it's been about 3 years, Chris.
Yes.
So we keep hoping, because the FAA has reprioritized snow as a major thing, but there's no money being put where the mouth is on that. And so we keep pointing that out every year that, hey, you say this is important, but we can't ever get funding because the rate's so low. And so we're hoping eventually we'll get some discretionary money to buy one of those. If not, this will allow us some time before we have to get in there and replace that snow blower.
Any other discussion? Any motions?
I'll make a motion that we approve the director's request to authorize the purchase of the runway broom for not to exceed $90,000.
Okay, I have a motion. Any further questions or discussion? And a second?
A second.
All right, I have a second to approve the request for authorization to acquire a used runway broom for the cost not to exceed $90,000. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Number 2, emergency terminal repair front stairwell roof.
Yes, as we mentioned last month, and kind of this continuation of odd weather phenomenons we've had the last few years, we had a really wet and windy storm earlier this spring, and somehow it blew water into the air handler that somebody put on the windbound side at the top of the escalators over out on the front here. And that water accumulated on the drywall ceiling and caused it to bust out. And so we also have some sprinkler lines up there, so we have to be careful to make sure we get the insulation back in there because we don't want the sprinkler line busting on top of all that. But unfortunately, that repair is so high up in the air, we can't reach it with any of the equipment we have. It's going to have to be some scaffolding built in there in order to get to it. And so we wanted to hire a contractor to come in and make those repairs, and we think it's going to be about $10,000 or less. I think, Rod, you're working on getting us a contractor now. But we'd like to ask the board's permission for some emergency repair capital dollars to go out and fix that terminal seal, that stairwell ceiling in there.
Okay. Discussion? Questions? Motion to accept the emergency terminal repair for the front stairwell roof not to exceed $10,000.
I'll make the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Rich second the motion. I have a motion and a second to accept the emergency terminal repair for the front stairwell roof. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approve or just opposed, nay. All right, motion passes.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Mr. Chair? John, I was just trying to remember, not that it changes anything, but what's the amount you're authorized to spend to do this without coming to the board?
We can spend, if I declare it an emergency under the state law, I can spend, I think it's up to $50,000 is the amount. This is, there's nothing operationally unsafe about what we've done, so I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, we can take 60 days to get this one approved and have it done this way. It's certainly an unscheduled repair, but it's not operationally bad like what we had last year when we had exposed pipes out there with no insulation and then the people walking right above what was exposed. So this one we had time to bring to the board twice and get it repaired. In fact, even lining up a contractor to do the work that's taking us this long.
Great. Okay.
Sure.
Excellent. Okay, number 3, FedEx building rental agreement extension.
Yes, in discussing the FedEx lease with corporate, that lease is expiring after 20 years. It was a finance-backed lease where the debt service has been paid off along with the lease, and they're both coming to an end over the next couple of years. As we've had those discussions, FedEx is in the midst of trying to determine what they want to do going forward. What they've told us thus far is they are interested in acquiring the building. That's the path they're on currently. So they would we would be looking for a long-term lease and the authorization to sell that building at some point in the future. But currently, as they're working through their corporate structure, it's taking longer than anticipated to get the approvals, and so they've asked us to extend their current lease on a month-to-month basis. Obviously, they want to get that decision made as soon as possible because they have an operation to run, and they want to ensure that they're not going to have any operational hiccups when that lease expires in June. We have a few more months. Ideally, they'll be done making their decisions by then, and we can move right into a longer-term agreement. The debt service overhangs the lease by about 9 months, and so we have debt service payments that we need to make. So having the lease continue on the current terms is advantageous for us for the time being, because this allows us to continue making those debt service payments as that loan matures out. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to extend the lease on a month-to-month basis. FedEx had an option in their lease that said that they could notify us and then we could approve an extension on current terms or terms to be negotiated. So they did provide that notice, but it required us to actually negotiate what the terms were. So it was really more of a formality than anything. And so what we both agreed is the best thing for now is just to extend the month-to-month agreement while they finish going through their approval process. We'd like to ask the board to do that, and we'll limit it for 1 year. We want to put some cap on it so that we progress this into an eventual longer-term relationship. I don't think we want to go month-to-month with them from now on. There's some investments we need to start planning for on their ramp. The glycol system needs to be replaced, and so we need some longer-term security there for us to begin planning on how we address some of those repairs. In addition, as we've been kind of kicking the can down the road, that building is 20 years old. It has continuous issues. I think this week they thought it was a leak in the floor heating system. It turned out to be a leak around a fixture on the roof, which is way easier to deal with. And so we have those things every couple of months that are coming up. We don't want to continue to do death by 1,000 cuts as that building matures. We want to see them, take advantage of the offer we've made them to acquire that building at a very reasonable rate, and then make the investments they want to make in that building going forward, and not have us as a go-between in there. I think that's the best for everybody. And so for the time being, we're just asking for the month-to-month extension. The board previously had authorized us to negotiate a sale, but at some point we'll be coming back with the lease side of that, what the land lease would look like moving forward, and bringing that to the board at a future date.
And then just a point of clarification that they do, and when they do buy the building, they will still permanently lease the ground from us as well as the ramp space.
Right.
Correct. So we would still be liable for the de-icing and continuing to upgrade the de-ice facility on the ramp area.
Yeah, what we've kind of told them is we've got some capital reinvestments, and so as the building rent goes away, we're going to phase in a fairly high ramp rent to allow the dollars for us to make those reinvestments in the ramp. As you can imagine, over the next 20 years, we're going to have some failures on the panels in that concrete ramp. The slit drain probably needs to be replaced, I would say, in the next 20 years. It's a mid drain, so you've got both sides of the concrete funneling into one drain. And over time, those pipes crack in that configuration because the earth is pushing on them from both sides and the heavy concrete's pushing on them from both sides. And so we're going to have to do some renovations of that glycol collection. When it was built, the idea was to treat the glycol and then release it to the city storm system. Gosh, I bet it's been 8 years ago. The city informed us they didn't want us to do that anymore because it's hard for them to treat in their system. So what we've been doing the last probably 3 years or 4 years is collecting that in a vault, and then we go and pump it and put it into our glycol ponds and evaporate it. So we've got a manual system in place right now, which isn't very efficient. And what we would want to do is, as we need to replace that system, is replace it with a lined lagoon that would be an evaporation pond. That's the current state of the art, and just like what we have in the terminal. And so that's the idea is, the building rent will go away. We'll charge them a higher ramp rent, which will allow us the funds to make improvements to the ramp. And then they'll pay a land lease for all the land underneath the building and the trucking apron and all that type of thing.
They have any long-term expansion plans?
No, that building was built oversized for them when it was constructed, and so they had from day one, and really still have, about 25% added capacity in there. They have some other operations that they've moved in there. I don't know, how would you characterize that?
Well, the city or ground delivery system is housed out of there.
Which it could be anywhere, and so, but by owning the building, it gives them all the incentive to want to move more cargo through it because, they have built-in capacity expansion. And we have talked about ways they can consolidate their route network to push more capacity through us from other regions that are currently feeding into other airports. And I think if we can peg a cost that doesn't change for them by putting that building in their ownership, so that from now on, they have a cost lower than what they've had traditionally here. It really cements us in a good position to grow that capacity. Already, when they've done maintenance at, say, Spokane, they've brought additional flights through here. They've done some things in Calgary, ramp maintenance and that type of thing. Those resulted in temporary increases in our capacity through here. So they certainly are aware of us on the route planning. And I think by giving them the lowest cost long-term that we can manage, we're giving them the best incentive to add capacity here rather than build new capacity in other cities.
Will their ground operations over at the northeast city, will they ever move up here?
No. No. You don't ever want to
There's
mention
three
ground
different-
and the air guys in the same sentence. Those two are I mean, it's, a few years ago, I went down to Memphis to their new headquarters, which is beautiful, and I asked, there's 5 or 6 buildings around the golf course, and it's wonderful, and I said, is one of these buildings ground? And I got to look like, are you crazy? So they moved into new headquarters, but ground was still all the way across town in the other part of Memphis.
Just kind of way you look at me when I ask that question.
No, they don't get along at all, and they really don't consolidate in any way. It's separate management and everything. I mean, it's just, they're cats and dogs.
Well, does FedEx have the same kind of operation they have here, like down in Billings in Missouri, California?
No, this is the state hub. So everything that comes into Montana via FedEx comes through Great Falls. We have the only Memphis flights, and there's a whole pantload of little commuter airplanes that come in that ferry everything from Great Falls down to all the other cities. They also have a pretty robust trucking network, so there's like a morning run on a truck. If it's here in time to get to the other city, they'll run a truck. But then at about 7 p.m., there's a whole bunch of feeder planes that come in order to get all the materials into the Memphis flight that heads out in the morning. And so this is the hub for the state, and then everything gets consolidated or gets flown out from here to the other communities. There's a mail hub in Billings that's just U.S. mail, and the planes are only U.S. mail. They
So
don't-
that's what those FedEx airplanes.
Yeah, the 720. I think they're still flying 72s over there. But yeah.
7.5.
Oh, they moved it to 7.5s now? Yeah. And so those are mail planes, and that's a different contract, the U.S. mail contract. I don't know when it's up again, probably about due. It seems like they did that every 15 years or so. And so that's a wholly separate contract. And that contract specifies in it that it has to, that operation is supposed to be in Billings. There was some political maneuvering that pegged that there. And it's a national contract, yet it talks about Billings. I think it's one of the only cities mentioned in there.
Does UPS still go through Billings?
UPS. Yeah, I mean, the UPS hub, and that one doesn't necessarily have to stay in Billings. Of course, they're a separate, entity. They could decide to go wherever they want to go.
Good. Questions, discussion? I get a motion to authorize the extension of the FedEx lease on a month-to-month basis for up to 1 year at the present rate.
I make a motion to extend the FedEx lease up to a year on a month-to-month basis.
And further question, discussion? Second?
I'll second
All right. With a motion and a second, all in favor of accepting the motion as previously stated for the FedEx building, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Motion passes. Okay, grant acceptance for the Montana State Aeronautics Grant.
As mentioned previously, last year the Montana legislature changed how airport fuel taxes are allocated. It used to be that the airlines were rebated almost all of the fuel tax collected, but they both increased the fuel tax last year and they removed the rebate for airlines, which resulted in about $1.5 million, we estimate, in annual funding that comes out of the commercial airlines that goes into the Montana Aeronautics program. And so those funds are largely planned to be used for matching grants at small airports. But in the past, the bigger airports had about $40,000 a year that we received in pavement maintenance grants to help us maintain our pavements. And so with that change in how funding works, we elected to apply for some grants from that new program that's been set up. And so we applied for 2 grants, $34,000 for a design of our new de-icing pads that we plan to construct in 2021. And then $200,000 for our local share of roadway rehabilitation that we plan to undertake this summer. And so we were offered a $17,500 grant and some loans, some low-interest loans to help us to finance the projects. We've talked about it internally, and we don't see any real facility in taking out those loans. I can't say that I don't see a situation where we would ever use that program, but there are very few where I think we would use that program maybe as an operating line of credit 1 year if we did a major terminal project and we wanted to repay ourselves from the airlines over a couple of years and we didn't want to dig into reserves, we might consider taking out one of those loans. But for our normal operating every year grant, that's not a device that's real useful for us. And so we do want to accept the $17,500 grant that has been offered. And so we need board authorization to do that. We'd like to accept the Montana Aeronautics grant in the amount of $70,500.
And are there any strings attached to any of that?
Well, not that we're aware of. I mean, no, I don't think there are. It's kind of a new program, for them. But no, in other states, there are some states where the state covers half of the match for most of the AIP projects. You see that throughout different states where they have a strong funding system for the aeronautics program. Oftentimes it is fuel tax that's used. So we were kind of hoping that's what we were going to be looking at going forward, but it looks like it's just going to be kind of catch as catch can. The projects they like, the projects they don't like, they'll award and not award money to. And so I think $17,500 is enough to make the effort, and in the future I think we'll continue to try to apply to that. We think we have a decent chance of getting funds.
So John, where did the rest of the $1.5 million in tax revenues go?
Well, I don't know who all got grants. Chris, do you remember who was awarded grants?
There was about 30 airports within the state, and most of them received their
full amount.
That they
yeah,
requested.
so
But mainly small airports.
There was no attendance from other large airports such as Billings, Bozeman, Helena, Kalispell. Those were not in attendance. They were.
I think we're the only one of the major airports that
Everything else was smaller GA. So
Shoto got some grant money for snow equipment.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, last year during the debate on this, we made the point that some of these airports, for instance, aren't even charging fees. And there's one other small airport that has more runway capacity than we have. And so, I mean, I think there needs to be some rationalization of that whole discussion about, hey, look, manage your asset first, and then, let's figure out how we divide these funds. So I'm hopeful in the future that we can have, I think as a state, a more productive discussion about, the needs and where the funding came from. I know one of the proponents of this was very vocal that, hey, look, none of the airlines have pulled out any service, and, so really this wasn't a big impediment, and we've had all this growth. And so one of the other airports, which has like us, which hasn't had a lot of growth, pointed out, hey, look, not everyone's growing. You're basing that on one or two airports that are being very successful because of incentive dollars that their communities are putting in. Those of us that don't have incentive dollars aren't seeing, major growth. And so I think it is a touchy subject, and I do suspect that we'll see more attempts to increase this funding pool. The requests that were made, only about half of them were successful in this legislative cycle, and so they may come back and ask for more funding for that program.
So we don't have any reason to think it's always going to be $20,000 or less.
No,
There's no, clearly there's no pattern because it just happened, but.
Yeah, I think going forward, as we have more airfield specific programs, we just happen to be in a cycle right now where we're doing landside work. And, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot of thought to understand that the roadway system into an airport is as important as the runway. If you don't have the road, then, you don't have anything. But at the same time, I get the impression that they're more interested in funding airfield projects. So as we go back to the airfield maybe next year, it might be a good time for us to apply for a match again. And because we'll have that de-icing pad that we're trying to get constructed. So that might be a good project for next year. But 17,500 is certainly helpful. And I think as we look at our funding needs going forward, if we can rely on this program to provide some of the funds that we need going forward, I think that would be really helpful. I mean, if the money is going to come out of our commercial airlines, I'm hopeful that we'll get an opportunity to go back and ask for a reduction of those capital costs that we then have to charge the commercial airlines.
Do you get the impression in the legislative discussion that it was more focused towards serving the GA airports that don't have airline service?
Yes, the supposition from the group supporting this is that there aren't funding sources for many of these small airports to maintain their infrastructure. That was basically the premise, that we have $80 million in unfunded projects that we can't find the money, and if we had the money, we could get more grants. I don't think it's true that if you had the money, you would get more grants, because they still have to compete. So that was kind of a false assumption. But then in addition to that, like many programs, there's the rationalization factor of, does an airport that has no commercial service need 3 runways? Their wind profile isn't much different than Mars, and this board effectively closed a runway a few years ago because we couldn't fund it. So that's a decision even an airport with a lot more resources makes in order to effectively manage, our financial situation. And so, I think there's got to be some effort to rationalize the infrastructure that we're building with these dollars to ensure that the total of the flying public is getting, the best we can out of it without overtaxing the commercial airlines, which is, some people say Montana's second largest industry. So, I think that's the debate that needs to continue to happen. And I think we were fairly successful. I think all but one representative from Great Falls last year voted against this. But our understanding was it was part of a broader coalition of infrastructure projects that was passed last year, that this kind of got swept into that as this was part of the infrastructure bill. And so we were kind of a wave swept over that whole thing and got it through. And so ideally we'll have a more lengthy discussion in the future when this comes back up. I know last year, despite a lot of efforts to get in front of these committees, and there was a lot of, hey, your total side gets 2 minutes, because we, I think as a group, kind of came to the conclusion that the decision was largely made by some of those committees before we even got there.
Does the law have a sunset on it, or is it just this way until it changes?
Yeah, it'll be this way unless it's changed legislatively.
Have the airlines said anything about it?
Oh yeah, all of the major airlines that are active in Montana came and lobbied against this. And largely I don't know that they were effective, honestly. I mean, there was a lot of, debate as to whether or not that was helpful or not.
Okay, discussion.
Will this come in this fiscal year?
Yes. Yes.
All right, no further discussion. Can I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the grant from Montana Aeronautics in the amount of $72,500.
Any final questions, comments? Can I have a second? All right, I have a second. With a motion and a second, all in favor of passing the acceptance grant for the acceptance of the Montana State Aeronautics for $17,500, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? It's approved.
task order number 25. Lost it. For the 2020 Construction Management Services Road Rehabilitation Phase 2.
Yes, as we said in previous months, Jacobs Engineering is our current engineer under our 5-year contract. The FAA does require us to have on-site construction management services during federally funded projects. They do things like proctor the asphalt to make sure it meets standards, and they observe the placement of material to ensure that it's done to standard. And they are active during the project to work with the contractor on issues that arise on any given project. And so this task order number 25 would provide those construction management services and oversight for this summer's program. The task order is $225,000. Rod has been working on an IFE, which we haven't completely finished
I hope
negotiating.
to have that done tomorrow, so it'll be something less than what this is.
Yeah, so we've got an independent fee assessment. We have an independent fee assessment from a third-party engineer, and we'll negotiate this requested task order down to something that is we consider fair based on the feedback we've gotten from that independent fee assessment. And so the request would be that we execute task order 25 with an amount not to exceed 225. We will negotiate that contract once we have the IFE, and then that'll be the final amount.
Any discussion? Questions, comments? All right. Can I have a motion?
Motion to approve $225,000 to fund task order number 25 for construction management services for the 2020 capital program.
And last
Second.
questions or comments? Can I have a second? All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor of accepting task order number 25 for construction management services for the 2020 capital program, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? All right, on to the de-ice. For centralized de-icing facility phase 1 design and bidding project.
Yes, we're in the process of starting design work on our 2021 project. Our plan for 2021 is to build a new de-icing pad. It's looking like the most likely scenario would be more or less to connect Romeo 1 to Romeo 2 in this area here. As you can see, this white mark right here is the current de-icing infrastructure. So the terminal ramp is designed to flow into that, and then it's transported over to these lagoons for evaporation. So what we're able to do is by building in this area, we can make the grade such that the material flow back into the same slot drain over here, so we can double utilize that. And by moving these planes, today what's happening is like United will de-ice in this throat, oftentimes a plane will de-ice in this throat. We're limiting our ability to get in and out of the terminal complex while those planes de-ice. And during the afternoon run, we've got planes coming in and going, and so it does become difficult. In addition, we often have snow operations on that same ramp while we're trying to de-ice those planes, and so it makes for quite a bit of a mess. In addition, once that glycol's on the ground, that material gets pretty slippery, and so as we're trying to de-ice in that area, or trying to push planes and do snow, we've got that big area of de-icing material that'll end up setting in these intersections. And so by creating this new de-icing pad, we can get the plane to power out. Obviously, those of you that are familiar with de-icing chemical, you have a limited amount of time once you de-ice that plane to have the plane airborne, because really the purpose of it is only to get the plane up and get the onboard systems active and hot so that they can keep the wings from icing. And so that is supposed to keep those wings from getting iced while they're on the ground. So you're really time restricted in the amount of time you have to get it up there. And so if we can have the plane up and running and ready to go and ready to pull out once it's de-iced, that gives us the best opportunity to get that plane out and keep it out of the way and keep the taxiways open. Further, as it says in the memo, as the airport grows, and we really saw this last year with the morning flights from United to both Chicago and Denver, we only have these gates here to work from, these 5 gates here. And so having the ability to overnight a plane in close proximity to the terminal is really ideal for us because as we get additional flights, let's say we would get an LA flight, the best time slot for that is likely in the morning also. It gives us the ability to pull one plane off and have it ready to go, so when the pilot comes in for that plane, once the overnight is out of the gate, he can pull that plane into the gate and get it boarded and get it out of there. And so they really provide double duty for us. In addition to that de-icing capacity during the rest of the year, particularly the busy summer month, we can RO in planes on that spot and have a place close to the terminal. In a worst case scenario, like we had a couple years ago where we had a bunch of Bozeman and Billings diversions all in one night, it also gives us the flexibility, if it's in close proximity to the terminal, to remote deboard that plane. So if we don't have a gate open and we need to get those passengers off of there, we could call for some air stairs to be brought over and then marshal them through the terminal ramp into the building in a case where we have a bunch of diversions, we don't have any gate space. And so RO-in spots, really, SeaTac, if you know that airport well, if you've flown into it, has been, since I was there some 20 years ago, one of the first things that in the airfield planning that I said is we need more remote parking, and that really is the biggest need of the airport. Still to this day, they're battling to find any corner they can to park planes in, and so it's kind of a poor man's way of expanding the terminal building, and I think it's a good investment for us from that perspective, and also the de-icing capability. So I think this is a great project. We want to get started on the design early because if the FAA continues to issue us early grants, it'd be nice if we could actually get some construction done before the snow flies. And so we'd like to allocate $350,000 to design this project. That will also come under an IFE. I think Rod, you asked for that IFE?
No, I'll be coming up.
Yeah, so that's another project that we've got to get an IFE for. So we'll get that independent fee assessment from the third-party engineer and we'll negotiate that contract, which we don't expect to exceed the $350,000 we're asking for.
Does that include any redesign of the glycol settling ponds on that corner?
No, the glycol ponds are in pretty good shape. Fortunately, we have two of them, so it allows us to divert from one to the other in order to clean a pond or something like that. And so those ponds are in pretty good shape, and they're only about, 15 years old, Rob? Is that about right?
Yeah.
And the only place those ponds are is in the corner as you make the turn around to the Holman, right?
Yes.
Just right on that edge.
Yeah, and they're pretty effective as evaporation ponds. We've never had to release that pond, those ponds, into the city system. A couple years ago, we cleaned them. We were able to drain them in the summertime to get down to almost nothing, and then we can actually drain them and clean them out. And so they're in pretty good shape, and that's another reason now is a good time to get these de-icing pads in. Is we can kind of double up on that investment and have some extra space over there to de-ice and not have to make improvements to the overall system.
But this does not include anything over on the FedEx ramp.
No, we haven't even really, and we've got some master plan level ideas on how that system would look, but we really haven't done any design work on that. It's not in the capital program currently. If we can get this building sold to FedEx, that would be a good time for us to look at putting some of those proceeds into making those changes at FedEx.
Questions, comments? Further discussion?
I was just kind of curious, do we have a statistic for how many days a year or whatever de-icing operations typically happen?
That Dwight does.
How many gallons of glycol do you sell a year?
A lot. I don't have that number off the top of my head. It can be just as simple as frost. So it can be a real clear day with no wind and then the ice and frost. Very little fluid, but it's an event. Or you could have a storm like last evening where it's substantial. So you don't have that number off.
And would you say the season is probably September all the way through May? Is that kind of?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would just say for a rough number, I would say 100 days out of the year.
Oh,
You're probably
really?
de-ice.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
never.
Because sometimes we're de-icing every single day for weeks.
Well, and you're all familiar with that time of year when that Minneapolis flight gets into that sort of 5:30-ish time of year. It's mainly done to provide time for de-icing. You see it, 6 a.m. would be in the summer, and then it drifts into that terrible 5:30 hour. And a lot of that's because it's
Guess I'll
likely.
be having that in a week.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
But, that's to accommodate that de-icing time, so that we have time in the morning if we have to de-ice, to get those planes de-iced.
So this makes sense then, like you said, not just from the de-icing standpoint, but even with the uncertainty of the future of small airplanes, I guess, to be able to use it for parking.
Yeah, we've
It's a whole
designed this to be big enough for larger planes, both for parking and for de-icing. And so, yes, I mean, we've considered that. And we even talked to the Guard at one point about bringing the C-130s through, because, as I've mentioned previously, the C-130s currently de-ice on their ramp, which doesn't really fit our stormwater goals. And so, but fortunately, with their ramp expansion this summer, they're adding their own lagoon. And so they'll be taking care of that issue for themselves. Obviously, the fighter jets, that was a completely different operation, but that C-130 has a big old wing, and they're flying in all conditions. And so de-icing became a real thing a few years ago. And so now they'll have their own capability too, so that we're not putting this material in our grass ditches and that kind of thing. Going forward, we'll be collecting it all either at the FedEx ramp, at the Guard ramp, or at our ramp.
How many actual spots are you talking for aircraft?
I think there'll be primarily one de-icing spot, but when you're looking at RON positions, we think we can get 3 regional jets in there, or less than that if you had a main line.
Because even if it's a clear night, if it goes below freezing, you get Boston, you have to do a de-ice. That's adds to your 100 events a year easily.
And this is really a first
Until the
phase
sun comes up.
of RON parking. We looked at the other spot, we talked about putting the de-icing pad was in this corner, so we could eventually pave that to create some more de-icing capacity and RON capacity. And really, since I've been here, Rod and I have talked many times about paving this so that we could push a plane or two back in this corner also. That's not weight-bearing pavement right now, it's just, it's there as a snow dump, more or less. And so we have some other areas where we can push planes back into in the future if RON parking becomes a major issue. But 3 RON spots for us, and then we can always move them over. Oftentimes, Dwight has room on his ramp where we can remote park them. That just creates a much longer morning for the pilot because he's got to go over there and get that plane and come back, bring that plane back over here. If we can get them closer to where the tug can do some of that work, then it gives us a lot more flexibility. But we have plenty of RON spots going forward if we think we need more. 3 for us is a lot. I mean, I think we'd all be really excited to have 3 RON spots.
What, is that an acronym?
Main overnight.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Sorry.
I don't. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, oftentimes when we talk to Frontier, for example, when they were coming in, the very first question is, can we run a plane there? And and that it's a consideration because we don't have a Frontier gate. We never did have a Frontier dedicated gate, and that's oftentimes one of their first questions is, what can we do with our plane? Because the places they're coming from, if you think about it. One of the solutions for Alaska Airlines in Seattle, because this has been a bloody battle for many years to find enough places to store their own planes, is to start out putting those planes. And so I think we had a fairly good discussion earlier this year, kind of spearheaded by our station manager back to corporate about, hey, could we get another flight and RON it here? So in other words, could we have an 8 o'clock, or maybe you move that to a 7 o'clock, and then could we have a 9 o'clock? Because we have capacity to store your plane, and and so as they look at long-term solutions at airports like Seattle that has no more room to expand, or in LA which has no more room to expand, some of those solutions might be to push the planes out into other communities and fly the plane back in the morning, which could advantage us. You're looking at, there's a couple airlines, you've probably seen it, it's been out in the press, are looking at more red-eyes flights, and that's partially because of that. They're trying to reposition planes because they don't have anywhere to store them. And so if we can take advantage of that by being ready and having a couple empty spots around, I think that also plays to our advantage.
Welcome to my world in San Francisco. Red eye every night, huh?
That's why there was serious consideration given to, I think it's Airbus has the plane that folds the wings up, right? They offer that, but no one's bought one. But they, I forget which model, but.
I can only imagine the pain that would cause. All right, any further discussion or questions? All right, I will move then that we accept task order number 26 for engineering design and bidding services of the centralized de-icing facility not to exceed $350,000. Any final questions or comments? Can I have a second? I have a motion and a second for the task order number 26 as previously stated. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Continue to the auditor selection approval.
Yes, as we said last month, we received one audit proposal from our current auditor, Anderson Zermühlen, and based on the working session last month, I think the board is comfortable with not conducting interviews, but instead proceeding with the selection of Anderson Zermühlen based on the proposal. We feel the cost increases, which are relatively slight, are reasonable. Obviously, they're a qualified auditor. They've done a really nice job with our audits, and they handle the majority of the commercial airports in the state. So we're dealing with a team that has a lot of experience, and so we would recommend that we accept their proposal and execute a contract with Anderson Zermühlen for audit services.
Any questions from our audit finance committee? Comments?
They're a good firm. They do a good job, and but I look back and the fees actually they escalate every year about 4.5%, 3.5%. But I went back to 2014 and did the same fees. So actually, we've had no increases in our audit fees for 2021, 22 that we had for 14, 15, 16, and 17, 18, 19. So that's a good deal. And so.
Any other discussion or questions? Can I have a motion?
I'll make the motion that we accept the proposal from BZ for the audit for the next 3 years. Is that it, 3 years? Yep.
All right, I have a motion. Any last comments or questions? Can I have a second?
Fees are on page 16.
Okay. I have a motion and a second that we accept AZ for our airport audit for the next 3 years. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, that passes. All right, any other items that I missed that were not penciled in on my sheet? All right, we'll finish up with Airport Authority Board comments from anyone. Commissioner Gibbs. Commissioner Lalonde. Commissioner Smith.
We have a question on his evaluation later on. We'll do what, in April, May? Are we going to use the same format as we used last year? So if I have a copy, I can start putting stuff out.
Absolutely. In fact,
Which I'm sure
Deb has
everybody-
just
I'm
asked
sure
me.
everybody else has already started to hit on me, but I.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I'll send out a fresh one.
What's that?
I'll send out a fresh one.
Yeah.
I answered you that.
I know you
Yeah.
did, Antonio, good job, thank you very much, and I got it, but
Okay.
they quite. it looks
Yeah, I'll
like
send
it's
it,
like the
I'll send
same.
it out. Yeah, so we start with,
And that's
usually start
what
with
we
the
do on
clean
board,
one.
and, what you got six-
Yeah.
Sorry?
Oh, no, I was just saying something to Casey.
Oh, okay.
You were asking about same format, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, and clean copy, clean sheet. Okay. All right. Anything else, Commissioner Smith? Commissioner Aaron's? Commissioner Timbo?
Is anybody going to the city's training tonight?
Yeah.
Tomorrow night.
Or tomorrow?
Night.
Tonight or tomorrow? You can be tomorrow.
Commissioner Evans?
Nothing.
I have no additional comments. Do we have any additional comments from the public?
I just have one question for John. I was just curious if you got any inkling at all from FedEx that they may be considering moving to another community, i.e. maybe Billings, that they're already going into Billings for both mail and freight. And I was just wondering if you got any feeling at all that that might be a possibility.
I think it's a possibility. I mean, if you really think about the center of the state from a flow consideration, we're really not that far off. It'd probably be closer to Helena. But you know, I think it's a distinct possibility. I think what anchors, well, I won't say which airline, but I just got an earful a couple days ago about the rising cost at many of the Montana airports. And we were specifically excluded from that.
Good.
You know, so I think, you know, if you look at all the other airports right now, growth has a cost. And so they're doing structured parking at some of these airports. Almost everyone has a terminal project that is, most of them multiples of what we spent a few years ago. I mean, real multiples, sometimes 10 times more than what we spent a few years ago. And so, you know, as you're looking at these other communities, I think the cost profiles are increasing. And so I feel like we're offering them a good value. I think FedEx understands. I mean, we started this conversation, I bet it's been 5 years ago, when I went to Memphis and sat down with them and said, look, we want to make a long-term commitment to you guys. We'll hope you feel the same. So I feel that they understand that we're trying to create value for them and provide the best long-term cost solution. Which oftentimes isn't necessarily the cheapest thing today,
right.
But we've made a pretty big commitment to try and ensure that their operation, you know, they have a foreseeable cost profile going forward. The cost will actually decline for them over time as that building is now paid off, and we look for cost-effective ways to continue the life of that building. We feel that the best way to do that is to get them ownership of it so they can decide what's worth investing in and what isn't. And so we've had really good discussions, and my impression is they appreciate how far we're trying to extend ourselves in order to ensure they're part of our community for another 20, 30, 40 years. And you know, I think they're facing a somewhat uncertain future with, you know, I think you may have seen Amazon announced some plans to begin opening some hubs in the West. And so that is coming, and you know, I think logistics is definitely part of their business, and so you know, I think all those things considered, you know, we're the safe option right now. You know, we have the capacity that we can commit to them long term for them to grow. We have a very stable cost profile. You know, we've worked diligently with the airlines for them to recognize the benefit of FedEx. I think probably this board doesn't remember, but as we've negotiated the airline agreement, I think I've done, what, 3 extensions since I've been here, Laura? We've continually increased the amount of passenger revenue that we're subsidizing the airfield with, recognizing that as we've grown the passenger revenue, and we've grown it substantially, that FedEx needs to participate in that benefit to lower the airline costs, and so we've allocated more and more of that revenue over to the landing fee side in order to reduce landing fees. And so, you know, I think they're familiar with all of those things that we've done to try and stabilize their cost profile going forward, and I think that's why we've had so much cooperation. But no, they've never, you know, threatened or even described, mentioned that they might want to go elsewhere. You know, but I think, you know, certainly it's something we have to be mindful of, and something we've talked about, and you know, throughout the 10 years I've been here, that we need to manage that cost profile to make sure we're, you know, we're keeping FedEx in mind.
What's Billings airport fees compared to Great Falls? There's some higher, but not certainly nothing like Kalispell or Bozeman.
No, I think what you're seeing is the terminal costs are expanding rapidly for the airlines at the other airports. The landing fee is not as much because no one's building new runways. You know, there hasn't been any major airfield expansion. So I think last time I looked at it, which is probably 6 months ago, we were very competitive, kind of middle of the pack on landing fee. And then the terminal rents, we have a substantial advantage. And so, you know, I think that when you look at the overall, the passenger airlines look at the cost per enplanement, We're on the low end of the equation within the state. And I think most of the costs of these major expansions are not in those rates yet. So I think when you're looking at the outlook of most of the Montana airports compared to us, I think that's where we're going to have some cost advantages because we don't have a $50 or $60 million capital program planned in the next 2 to 3 years. We have in fact, the opposite. We're paying off a lot of our debt service in the next 4 to 5 years. And so, we're having the opportunity to reset our rate structure at this point in time when many of the other ones are leveraging up and having to take on more in the rate structure. So I think we provide a pretty good value and going forward even more of a value compared to the rates at many of the other airports.
Including billings.
Including billings, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent.
Well, and the other thing I would point out too is, at Billings, it's one of the few places in the entire system where FedEx contracts employees to do their loading and unloading. So I think that shows you the commitment difference between the two stations. We're FedEx employees.
Right.
Over there they're contracting that function out, and it's one of the few places they do it.
That's interesting. Excellent. Any additional public comments or questions? Okay, with no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. Let's take a quick 5 minutes, be back here at 25 after, and we'll do a quick working session for some of us old guys.
John, what's the usual attire for the aviation conference?
I think it's business casual. I mean, you'll see a lot of jeans there because it's Montana.